views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Welcome to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. We start our new series today, The Road to the Governor's Seat. Two candidates, Tom Suozzi, Paul Nichols. Stay with us. Today's verdict starts right now. Okay, welcome back to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. We have joining us with us today, Congressman Tom Suozzi, a candidate for governor, and we're very happy to have him. Congressman, thanks for being here today.
Hey, David, thanks for having me on the show.
You're an attorney, CPA, attorney as well. How do you think those two things help you in terms of your ability to be a governor? I mean, we don't have too many candidates who are actually attorneys, and it's nice that you are one. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the CPA, the Certified Public Accountant, actually helps me more than the attorney because I learned how to understand how big organizations operate. I was an auditor for a big 8 accounting firm. So I always talk about how I'm a proven executive. I'm trained as a Certified Public Accountant and attorney. I was the mayor of a small city, Glen Cove. I did my 10,000 hours. I learned how to run government. I was the county executive of one of the biggest counties in the country, bigger than 11 states, Nassau County. I ran the 12th largest police department in the country, bigger than Boston or Detroit. And now I'm in Congress for 5.5 years. So I know how to run government. I know how to get things done.
Common sense Democrat, right? That's how you label yourself. I consider myself that many times as well. Or at least I consider myself having some type of common sense. Why is that so important now? Given the fighting that is occurring even within the Democratic Party.
You know, that's it right there. People are so sick and tired of elected officials and politicians battling with each other. They just want us to get things done. They want us to address the real problems they face. So when I say I'm a common sense Democrat, I'm not going to pander to the left to just try and get votes. I'm not going to back down to the right. I'm a lifelong Democrat who will work with anybody. I'll work with Democrats. I'll work with Republicans. I'll work with progressives. I'll work with moderates. I'll work with anybody if you really want to help the people, if you want to solve the problems people face. And that's what I've done my entire career.
But I just wonder, is there a place for a moderate, for those, for those in the middle who's trying to sway a little to the right, sway a little bit to left, changing, depending on the particular issue? We've become so polarized in the Democratic Party.
And the Republican Party.
And the Republican Party. Do you think
they've got their far right? We've got our far left. I'm talking in this race about crime, reducing crime, and taxes, and affordability, and helping our kids in our troubled schools. And people say, Tom, you're a Democrat. You've always been a Democrat. Why are you talking about crime and taxes? Because Democrats care about that too.
Sure.
So this race is really about whether or not a proven executive who's a common sense Democrat, who's focusing on crime and taxes and affordability and helping our kids in our schools can win. Because I'm not a lefty. I don't even like using the word moderate. I'm a common sense Democrat. I've got all good rankings for Democrats. I'm the chair of the Labor Caucus in Congress. I have an F rating from the NRA. I was an environmentalist and I got Fernando Ferrer as my campaign chair. What more can you ask for?
Well known in the Bronx, big fan. So let's talk guns. Let's talk mental health and gun laws. So important right now. I know, especially with what happened in Buffalo. The NRA doesn't like you. We know that's true. What would you do if you were governor with respect to guns and getting the guns off the streets? What are your thoughts?
Well, there's a whole bunch of things we need to do. I have a 15-point crime intervention and prevention plan related to things we need to do right now. A lot of things that Mayor Adams is saying about going after crime, giving judges the discretion to consider dangerousness, and then the mental health things that you've mentioned as far as the long-term prevention things we need to do in our schools, expanding the power of Kendra's law to get people that are mentally ill to take their medication and to get them the support that they need. But we have a thing in New York State called the red flag law. It was passed a few years ago. It's a great law. The problem is it's not being used. I think if we had educated people about it, it could have helped us in cases like Buffalo. I laid this out back in January when those 2 police officers were killed by that mentally ill guy in Manhattan. And the mother said, oh, I always knew he had problems. Same thing with this guy in Buffalo. He got in trouble in school for saying he was going to kill people and kill himself. He went to a mental health facility for a day and a half. The state police were investigating him. And under the red flag law, red flag is waving, they could have gone to the courts and said, this guy shouldn't have guns.
It is such a gray area, though, Congressman, because to really know when the threat is there, it's hard to know that. Yes, if you threaten a school, that should be enough. That's enough. That's a red flag.
I don't think this one was that gray. This kid had manifestos of racist, hateful things, and he said he was going to kill his classmates and kill himself.
Yeah.
I don't think that was a gray area at all.
I tend to agree with you on this particular instance. Listen, we had all the mayoral candidates on. I don't know what their thoughts are, or were at least on bail reform, but I'm going to start with you on this. I live in Manhattan. I'm working, all day in the Bronx. My family's been here since 1965 in the Bronx. Crime's on the uptick.
Absolutely.
Bail reform is on everybody's mind.
Not working.
It's not working. But how do we fix it? What do we do? What are your thoughts on that?
So let me just say, you talked about the mayoral race. I endorsed Eric Adams very early on in his race for mayor. He actually asked me to be his deputy mayor. And I said, I'm not going to be your deputy mayor. I'm running for governor. I can do more as governor to help you and help the city of New York. But he wants us to give judges the discretion to consider dangerousness, as does the police commissioner, as does the chief judge, as does every state in the United States of America gives judges the discretion to consider dangerousness when defendants come before them.
There again is the gray area again. I work in the judicial field. I'm a trial attorney. I know when you give judges discretion, sometimes it's not the greatest thing to do. But is there any way we can codify in some form what dangerousness is? Is that something we could do? Or?
Well, we have to be very concerned, as we do with all the judiciary and all law enforcement and all of society, about unfairly treating Black and brown people. That's our big concern that we have to fight against. That's why Eric Adams was such a perfect messenger for this, because he always fought against racial injustice in the police department, but he also is in favor of law enforcement.
Yes.
So I have, there's a guy up at Yale University that Philippe Patif Goff is his name, that has an idea called CompStat for Justice. Let's monitor the behavior of law enforcement. Let's monitor the behavior of judges and use statistical analysis to see if they're unfairly treating Black and brown people. So the same as we do with CompStat, where we monitor crime with detail. It's not about subjective opinion. Martin Luther King used to say, you can't legislate morality, but you can regulate behavior. Let's use technology. Let's use monitoring and see, is this judge being particularly unfair and always remanding people that are Black or brown? Are they always giving high bail for Black and brown people? Is this police officer only using force what he's doing with Black and brown people or in certain neighborhoods? Let's accept the fact that we're all against crime. Everybody wants to reduce crime.
What about forgiving behavior? What about, the sealing of criminal records? How do you feel about that?
This clean slate law that they're talking about goes too far. I think there's a legitimate idea there that, for someone with low-level offenses when they were kids, shouldn't have to haunt them the rest of their lives. But we have to be very serious about people with serious crimes and how long a period passes before they can be looked at. If you're going to be a daycare worker, if you're going to be working in a hospital, if you're going to be working with children, we need to know. If you're going to be around, sensitive areas, we need to know what you did in your past if it was illegal behavior.
Well, we've had a lot of councilmen and we've had these assembly members on this show over the last 6 months. Everyone's moving to the left, and I just don't know how far we go. And certainly, sealing criminal records is moving to the left.
Well, we all have the same goal. Okay, we want a fairer, more just society. We also want people to be safe. We want our kids to be safe. We want to be able to take the subway. We don't want to have businesses afraid they're going to get robbed. We don't want people worried that their kids are going to get beaten up. We don't want people shot in crossfire. We all have the same goals. As a chief executive, and that's why I always emphasize that I'm a proven executive who gets things done, you need to bring in all the stakeholders. You need to bring in the the police commissioners and the mayors and the judiciary and parole and probation and corrections and mental health experts and advocacy groups and legislative members and come together and say, listen, we all have the same goal. We all want to reduce crime.
You have a great, I did my homework, okay? You have a great expression. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. I've liked it very much. I may even use it myself. Albany has a perception, you want to say corrupt, you want to just say that there's corruption. I don't know how you want to put it.
We don't have to say it. The Washington Post said New York State is the most corrupt state in the United States of America last August. We've seen the last 3 governors leave in scandal: Attorney General Schneiderman, Hevesi, Skelos, Spitzer, Silver, Bruno. The lieutenant governor just got arrested for bribery and corruption.
How do you clean it up? What do you do?
You need competition. You need people to be held accountable in politics. That's why politics matters. That's why democracy matters. We have to hold our elected officials again. People say, why are you running a primary against the sitting governor? Because we have the highest taxes in the United States of America. Our crime rate is going up. We have more people leave New York State than any state in the United States of America. We left these kids behind in our failing schools for generations, and we're the most corrupt state in the United States of America. We need to shake things up in New York State. I'm fighting for the people. My running mate, Diana Reyna, who will be the first Latina elected statewide in the history of New York State when she becomes the lieutenant governor. We have the heart for the people, and we have the skills who know how to get things done to serve the people.
I ask candidates this all the time because you really just don't know who's going to be sitting in the chair. What do you think your biggest challenge will be? You have to be thinking about that. There's got to be something that you're like, wow, this is going to keep me up at night if you end up winning the election. What's your biggest challenge, do you think?
Number one is getting the crime rate reduced and making people feel safe and getting the legislature to go on board, because I'm going to sell the idea to the people. And I'm going to try and sell it to the legislature. I'm going to try and negotiate with them, but we may have to get into a big political battle over it. And hopefully we'll be able to team up with the mayor and other people throughout the state to fight to get this done, because people are concerned about crime. And secondly, we have to reduce the cost of living here. People can't afford the taxes. They can't afford the rent. They can't afford the utility bills. This is a big, giant challenge. We have the highest taxes in the United States of America, higher than, that's not like emotional, that's proven fact.
Yeah, it's been that way for a while now. Listen, Congressman, I want to thank you very much. It's all the time we have. Promise me if you elected governor, you'll come back on the show. What do you say?
David, I promise you. Please remember, everybody's got to vote on June 28th, Democratic primary.
All right, well, that's all we have for today's verdict. Stay with us. We'll be right back right after this. Okay, welcome back to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. We are continuing our governor election series, and today, right now, we have with us Paul Nichols, a candidate for governor. Paul, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, David. Again, thank you so much for having me on. Again, it's a pleasure to be here with you and your listeners. And as I say, looking at some of the old clips that you guys have on there, Anderson Cooper and Chuck Todd, they've got their hands full with you coming up there, David.
Well, listen, you're a product from Queens. That alone makes me like you. That's all I got to say. You grew up very close to where I grew up. We're not too different in terms of our zip codes. So, and I think you consider yourself a down-to-earth type of candidate. I've seen some of your interviews before. Would that be how you define yourself, Paul?
Absolutely. The essence of this candidacy is to bring a different style of leadership, one that is basically centered on what an average, ordinary New Yorker would do in certain situations. Because for too long, we've had the 1% lead the way, folks at the top of the food chain, for example, leading the 99%. And the problem with that, David, is there's no sense of urgency for the 1% to get the educational system right, for example, because they're not sending their kids to those schools. There's no sense of urgency to get the crime right, because the high crime's, quite frankly, not in their neighborhoods. And there's no sense of urgency to get the healthcare system right, amongst other things, because they're not participating in those healthcare systems. So, what would a regular person bring to these conversations that evidences that sense of urgency? And that's what we want to do.
So let's talk about schools for a second. You and I, grew up in a very similar neighborhood. We know what the schools were like in the areas, at least. I didn't go to private school. I don't. So what would you change in terms of if you have children, your children are going to the public schools of the city of New York, or wherever in the state? What would you change in terms of the school system?
So first, we've got to really shift the dynamic when it comes to how we, work with our teachers. My sister's a public school teacher, again, lifelong public school student myself. And, it's a shame that, my sister and many like her have to put their own resources into being able to supply just the basic needs for the students. We've got to change that. We've got to make sure we bring the right support for our teachers. We have to make sure that our teachers are paid very, very well. I'm an attorney, and once you hear high, big law salaries, folks often rush to those corporate law jobs, but no one, for example, is rushing to the big teacher jobs unless you have that strong passion for it. So we want to be able to raise salaries, be able to get the resources to the teachers, and then also unburden them from some of the shackles of some of the new systems that we've had. We've seen some controversies with Common Core and focusing on testing. When you and I were growing up through the school system, you had a holistic on the arts and then music. And so a lot of those things were taken away. And, these kids are pressurized with a lot of the things that, really make it where the focus is not on the things that make them come out as better students. We don't spend smart. New York State spends more than any single state in this country on education, but we're 16th. We should be getting a lot more bang for our buck. Jersey shouldn't be doing better than us in education, again, when we're out spending them. So again, we've got to spend smartly. We've got to go back to, some of the things that worked, and we've got to listen to our educators and say, take their advice. And again, ordinary folks, ordinary teachers, they've got a lot of insight instead of some of the, the high bigwigs that think that they know better than everybody else.
Yeah, because they have their feet on the ground. It's funny when I pick juries and I have teachers or nurses, they're the ones who are really on the front lines. Listen, those who take those corporate lawyer jobs, they leave those jobs a lot of times because
Absolutely.
it's just constant work. But I don't think we appreciate our teachers enough. I don't think so. And certainly they're the ones who know what they need to teach, the books that they don't have, and the supplies that they don't have, and the instruments that they can't use to help you learn how to play everything from the clarinet to the saxophone. I mean, it's
absolutely, David.
All right, let's talk a little bit about Albany, because that's where you'll be. And a lot of people believe it's a corrupt place. There's a lot of shenanigans that go on in Albany. It's always been the case. It's sad, but true. What would you do to change that, if you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, the first thing, again, I started actually in Albany at the age of 19, actually working for an upstate Republican, Senator John Bonasek, a great guy. And I spent, almost 2 decades really seeing the inner workings of how Albany functions and how it operates, and how there's such a pay-to-play culture there that we really got to go to the roots of changing that. Unfortunately, and fortunately, I'm from Southeast Queens, and there was a period in the mid 2010s where it seemed like every day you were picking up the paper and someone from Southeast Queens was, getting a knock on the door from the feds. And a lot of that is just really shifting the type of culture we have in Albany. It's got to be people-centered. So we need, again, a lot more transparency. There was a lot of deals that I saw that were happening that, you want the public's input on a lot of these things. We saw a lot of rush to have, bills come through without having the proper oversight. We're starting to see a little bit of the movement in terms of limiting outside income and limiting the ability for legislators to double deal. That's got to have a stronger emphasis. We've got to see that go through. But essentially, we also need to really, remove the outside influence of money in politics. For example, my campaign, we've made a commitment to $10, $25 donations. We've seen the current administration, holding $10,000, $25,000, ticket fundraisers. And interestingly enough, the Times Union reported that there was some folks that had dealings before the state that were paying for access. And we've seen that happen in the past. We've got to stop that. New York City's done a better job of having a publicly financed system. So that way you can at least be able to make those small dollar contributions go a little bit further, so that the regular voice of average folks becomes amplified when you don't have to chase down those $25,000, $30,000 contributions. And then we saw some of the pay in the play to get the Buffalo Bills stadium deal through, where you have conflicts of interest there. So some of it's common sense, but some of this is being able to remove the influence of money, being able to remove that in a very stark and strong way from the system. So that way, again, regular people's voices can be amplified.
Well, let's switch gears for a second to crime. Crime is up, not only here in the South Bronx, where I'm talking to you right now, but throughout the entire city. People are afraid. Guns are all over the place. What do we do? What can we do?
So, one of my favorite movies, Gladiator, the realistic character in which Marcus Aurelius was based off of, said that poverty is the mother of crime. And we've got to do something about our economics, because you have crimes of opportunity, but then you also have some crimes of necessity, where you see, often shops are being vandalized, and, gunpoint is, making people more and more violent because they're being left with no other options, no other choices. And, the economics of each and every individual is creating a breaking point for people where, places where I'm from, where, where I live is not too far from one of the, more, troubled housing projects in South Jamaica. And, a lot of that, the crimes that happen there, they're broken homes, that the economics of those homes have led to, choices that have led people down dark paths. And so we've got to shore up the economics of people. But then this is a little bit more controversial, and I'm a little bit more on the conservative side, but Voltaire, an interesting philosopher, said that if there were no God, then we would have to create one. We're becoming a godless society where we've taken God out, we've taken prayer out of the schools. I'm an advocate for bringing things like that back, and not necessarily on a purely religious point, but even just meditation in the morning in schools, where people can think of positive things, take a moment in the beginning and towards the end of the day to just disconnect and have positive thoughts and positive energy, conflict resolution, things that will allow for just a lot of the negative tension that builds up throughout the overnight, throughout the day, to influence, our day-to-day lives. So we've got to do something in making sure that we're not a godless society anymore, at least from a public safety standpoint.
Certainly, family structure is just so important, always has been. Here in the South Bronx, a lot of the families are broken, and they're hurting, and sometimes they're in the shelter system or they're in different places. My clients especially come in and they live hand to mouth. It's hard. What do you suggest we do? I understand religion's important. I understand, believing in something is important, but what can we do from a policy standard? In other words, is it Medicaid? Is it Medicare? What can we do to give them more of the amenities that they may need?
The first thing in my 5 points that we have on our website, the first thing is housing, because we see that the economics that come from just having folks spend way more than 30%, in some cases more than 50% of their income on just keeping a roof over their head. That's important. That's the first place that you start with, getting the economic situation under control, making sure folks, we have real affordable housing. Again, this goes back to the problem when you have the 1% dictating the conversation. Their definition of affordability and your average person's definition of affordability is two different worlds, two different conversations. Where 2,800, I was one of those that actually had my name on a list for affordable housing. I was excited because I got the email that said you've been chosen, you were qualified, and then I opened up the email, so the rent was like $2,900 a month for a one bedroom. My jaw dropped. I'm like, who is that affordable to? And so, we've got to be able to get the economics when it comes to affordable housing under control. When we see issues such as the healthcare system, insurance premiums are still going through the roof. If you're fortunate to have a job that will be able to cover insurance for you, that's one thing. But, people have to walk on eggshells because they don't want to get injured or have to have a medical emergency, because now your credit's gone through the roof. If now you're trying to, find some ways to be able to get yourself in a place where you're physically healthy, but not being able to have access to affordable health care like we have in every other developed country that's out there, those contribute to going into the pockets of regular, average, ordinary New Yorkers. We also have creative ways in which we want to do minimum wage, because $15 an hour, quite frankly, is still leaving folks in poverty, even if you're working full-time hours. So you can't have a one-size-fits-all where you recognize that big Fortune 500 companies, are going to pay the same wages as a mom and pop shop. We can't do that. Let's bring a common sense approach to minimum wage, where the statistics show that in order to survive in the city of New York and in the state of New York, you need about $30, $35 an hour, where if you say it to a mom and pop shop, they're going to have a heart attack. But what we can do is the state can come beside the smallest mom and pop shops and subsidize them. Instead of giving $1 billion to the Buffalo Bills, they'll be all right. Or, I'm a big Knicks fan, unfortunately. We give millions of dollars away to Jim Dolan and Madison Square Garden. Let's put that in our mom and pop shops to shore up the minimum wage so that they can get their workers up to the $20, $30 mark. So we can do a lot more.
And maybe we get a number one lottery pick once and get lucky.
That's right. That's
1980, 85.
Right.
Well, listen, Paul, we're gonna have to leave it there, but just promise me that if you're elected governor, you can come back on the show and say hello. What do you say?
Absolutely looking forward to it, David. Absolutely looking forward to it. Thanks so much.
Great meeting you. All right, well, stay with us. Today's Verdict has much more right after this. Well, that's all we have for today. I'd like to thank both our candidates for joining us, and of course, you, the viewers, for watching. If you have a topic or an issue you would like to see on a future edition of Today's Verdict, feel free to email me at davidlesch@bronxnet.org. Until the next time, know your issues, reach a verdict. See you in 2 weeks.